Welcome to the Building Sense for Life podcast. I'm Jacques Van Eeren, Financial Advisor and Director of NEMA. In each episode, I'll be joined by a guest as we explore key topics like insurance, investments, KiwiSaver, buying a home and estate planning. Together, we'll unpack these subjects to help you build your financial sense and make informed decisions. Please note that this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not intended as financial advice. So today we're going to be talking about KiwiSaver, and today we've got Jose with us. Do you want to take a minute and just introduce yourself and what you do and a little bit about your background?
Sure, perfect. Hey, Jacques, thank you for the time and thank you for the opportunity. I mean, really great to be on this chat today with you on KiwiSaver. Really important topic and something that we all seem to know a little bit about, and some more than others. But there's lots of stuff that I'm sure we can dig into as we go through this. My name is Joe, so Jose, as a few people know me. I am a Mortgage and KiwiSaver Adviser. I've sort of been in this space for the last year and a bit. My background essentially is all around personal finance, and that's where I came into this space. Worked across many banks of all colors in the New Zealand market, and then also have done a bit of work with American Express, and finally ended up working over the last 8 years with a business called CANSTAR, which, as many of you or many of our listeners would know, is essentially a research and ratings organization that works in the consumer finance space. The idea of the whole proposition around CANSTAR was around trying to help people to be more informed about money and money matters, so that when it came to making choices, they made the most informed choices that they could do, whether it be KiwiSaver or car insurance or home loans. So with that background, I thought it was really great to sort of be able to step out and fulfill a desire that I've had around consultative financial service and advice. And so that's really where I've sort of been focused on for the last 12 months. KiwiSaver is an area that's really an area of passion for me, because I quite love and understand the space. And for practical reasons, that although the product has been in the market for almost 17 years, it was an area that I really avoided for a good 7 or 8 years of its existence in the market, only because I thought it was a very complex product, and never really thought I would be able to understand what it all stood for. But then, having sort of delved into it over the last 8 to 10 years, I've realized, one, how versatile the product is, particularly for a market like ours, and two, as you're inching towards the golden years, as we say it here, you realize more and more how important it is in terms of doing many things for its users, whether it be building your home or to save for retirement. So it's an area that I enjoy, and I'm quite hopeful that we can have a great chat about it.
I think I would agree with you. A lot of people will find KiwiSaver as a bit of a complex beast that they don't necessarily understand, and they just deal with what they have, and they don't really understand the implications of trying to make something different out of it, and that there's so many options out there. I'm not really sure off the top of my head how many providers there are, but you can take providers and then funds, and kind of gets a very complicated mix.
I think you're right. I mean, even keeping it at very basic numbers, there are probably more than 35 odd schemes in the market, providers in the market that offer KiwiSaver schemes. And then if you look at an average provider, they probably got at least 3 or 4 funds, if not more, that they offer. So if you put it all together, the mix has a good 150 plus opportunities for people to consider.
Yeah.
And the fact, you're absolutely right. I mean, when I'm faced, there's too much of choice. When you're faced with too much of choice, people also then look at the easiest route out, which is, hey, what sounds good to me, or what does somebody in my family have, or what does my colleague tell me is good?
Yeah, I get into that analysis paralysis. Yeah,
exactly.
I'm not going to do what I need to.
Exactly. Or take the path of least resistance and go for a scheme that the employer suggests. You see, so there are multiple ways that you could end up in a scheme that's not exactly, or a fund that's not exactly appropriate for you, but you're there because you haven't had the time or given much room to consider.
Is that something that you saw a lot of through CANSTAR when you were working there?
Yes.
In terms of people being in the wrong funds? And
absolutely. One of the things that you realize when you start working with providers in that space was, one, every every fund and every provider brings a unique flavor to their offering. But also the problem with that is in the New Zealand market, we've been a little, how do I put it, shy in terms of looking at investments. And I think there's probably some good reasons for it. We've had going back too far, probably a couple of decades ago, we've had some serious issues with people losing money significantly around investments. Finance companies going bust and all of that. So where that's the effect of that was it sort of carried a bit of a stink around it.
Yes.
People didn't feel like they could trust schemes and providers, and especially if they were talking of anything where returns sounded any better than the banks were offering on their term deposits, it clearly sounded like too good to be true.
Yes.
And the other issue, of course, is that by default, we've always had a great love for property in this market. I mean, owning your own home or having something to call your own was and is still a big part of our financial freedom journey towards financial freedom. And so when one side of the market opportunity dried up or people got a little scared of getting into investments, automatically you saw property investment sort of take off because of that. And we've had people, mom and pop kind of families who wanted to save up for retirement, thinking that the only opportunity, the next best thing available for them was to buy their home, pay it down, and buy themselves a couple of rental properties that they could then see as income for future for their retired years.
Yeah, for sure. It's been a bit of a complex mix for the way that people view KiwiSaver over time.
Yes.
I think that has really changed a lot in the last 5 years, and I think it probably has a lot to do with the balances that people are having out of their KiwiSaver or getting to now that it's been out there for so long, and people also seeing it as a good vehicle to get their first home deposit.
Yes, that's right.
So they're trying to maximize everything. So they want to learn more about KiwiSaver, and it's getting a little bit more to the forefront than what it was even 5 years ago.
Exactly right.
I think that's definitely a big change. So I think in terms of KiwiSaver and your background a little bit as a mortgage advisor, how do you see that KiwiSaver helps people buy their first home, and like what have you noticed around clients and interactions there?
That's clearly one of the, how do I put it, one of the biggest benefits of KiwiSaver. Although KiwiSaver was built and is built still as a retirement program, savings program.
Yeah.
I think the flexibility of being able to draw down on your KiwiSaver savings to support a home deposit clearly is one of the best things that has kept the dream of owning a home still active and alive in this market. Especially because if you've noticed in the last 15, 20 years that we've sort of been tracking the market since KiwiSaver, house prices have continued to grow leaps and bounds. Although it's not been the case over the last year or two, but at least if you look historically, we've seen a phenomenal surge in terms of house values. Not all of it necessarily sustainable and not necessarily supportive of a first home buyer's dream of getting in.
Yeah, exactly.
In the past, as they say, if the average home was 3 to 4 times your annual income in terms of value, was tough, but it was pales into insignificance when you compare it to the fact that the average home costs anywhere close to 8 to 10 times your income to today. So clearly, not only has it got even more difficult to get in, but the studies show that it takes a good 10 years for an average couple to be able to save up a deposit to be able to feel like they can be part of that home buying dream that they sort of walked into. So clearly that seems to be the biggest issue. So the ability to access KiwiSaver has really come as a godsend in some senses. That's one area. I mean, clearly there should be other areas and avenues too. I mean, we know for a fact that the bank of mom and dad is still the biggest contributor of first home deposits, especially for people who are sort of jumping on that journey. But clearly that's not sustainable either. So
eventually that's going to dry up.
That's got to dry out sometime. We've all talked about this being the the generation where you're going to see a wealth switch, as you and I talked about in the past. This is going to be the wealth switch generation, because you're suddenly seeing one generation who've built assets over time now sort of ready to hand it over to the next group, and you're going to see a lot of that money get moved around. But that's currently supporting the deposit function for a lot of people getting into their homes. So clearly that's big. But KiwiSaver in and of itself is a great way to be able to see and grow into something more significant, to be able to contribute to first homes.
Yeah, for sure. So what are the kind of rules around accessing your KiwiSaver for your first home?
So, as we know, KiwiSaver for employed or salaried members of the society, for them, a couple of good things that come out of it in terms of the basics. One is your employer has to contribute a minimum of 3% to your scheme, to your fund. If I use the right word, to your fund.
Yeah.
So that's one, which then means that it's matched by your contribution of at least the 3%.
3%.
If you want your employer to contribute. You've got options to contribute more. As you're aware, you can contribute, I think, 4, 6, 8, and up to 10.
Yep.
On top of which, you can make voluntary contributions as well whenever you feel like.
Yeah.
So,
and a lot of providers make that super easy with direct debit forms, and
exactly,
there's lots of easy ways to set that up.
That's right. And so joining a scheme is really easy, so long as these days, if you join up, the employers will make sure that they've given you the option to consider joining a KiwiSaver scheme. Some employers tend to have schemes that they're part of, that they've signed up to make it easier for newbies to select a fund or a provider in a fund, so which is really good. So all of that's super easy. Setting it up, joining in is really, really easy. So that's a really good part. I mean, if you're talking for self-employed, it's slightly different because everything is voluntary. You need to do it for yourself.
Yeah. No boss to chip in 3% on top.
That's right. There are no additional 3% that are coming unless you put on your employer hat for yourself and pay yourself a 3%.
Well, 6% total, right?
That's right.
So you have to be like, okay, I'm going to pay myself 6%
Exactly.
on my KiwiSaver. And I think a lot of self-employed people do struggle to think of it in that way, that they should be doing at least 6%.
That's right.
For just to be keeping pace with everyone else.
Pace with everyone else.
That's, obviously New Zealand is quite a country that's built on a lot of people that are self-employed or people that are contractors. They all fall under this. They have to do their own KiwiSaver, and you do find that a lot of people end up not doing anything with their KiwiSaver. They might contribute the $1,000 to get the government contribution, but that's it, and they're missing out on so much. And then they get to their late 30s or their 40s, and then they realize, oh shit, I'm not going to have enough money for my retirement, and they start chucking as much money as what they can into it, and they just struggle. And this, I always think of there was a Nigel Latta series about like knowing your money, and he did a thing with an aquarium. Have you ever seen this?
No, I haven't.
And so there's like a little girl, she's like putting money into a KiwiSaver, which is pouring money into an aquarium. Just an empty aquarium, and then the mum waits until she's in her late 30s before she starts contributing, and then she starts throwing heaps of money into a KiwiSaver, like big buckets full of water.
Yeah.
And the kid stops at a certain age, and then they just top it up with compounding interest, and how quickly her aquarium is like overflowing, and the mum is still trying to catch up.
That's
and it's
right.
such a good visual representation of how the compounding interest makes such a difference, and why starting late can really actually put you far behind. You're going to be throwing a lot of money in there.
You're right.
Trying to catch up, but you're never going to.
Yeah.
So it's better to start early and do that 6% from when you can.
Very true, and I think you're absolutely right. I think that's a trap a lot of people who are employed for themselves, or self-employed and contractors, fall into, is not realizing that they need to take care of themselves as soon as possible and as early as possible in their money, in their revenue generating life.
Yeah.
And I think exactly like you talked of the Nigel Latta example, I still remember reading this book by the Barefoot Investor, if you've heard of him.
Yes.
And he's got a similar kind of story where he talks to somebody who invests $5,000 a year for the first 10 years of their life. and then somebody else comes along and later on, and so this first person stops investing after 10 years or whatever. I'm a little short on the detail, but stops investing after 10 years and lets compound interest take it over. Whereas the new person comes in and starts investing in 10 years later and probably invests more than what the first person invested, and yet still wouldn't be able to catch up with where the first person ends up at the end of their working time.
Yeah, and that first person, they don't have to worry about contributing more, so they have,
That's right.
they've got more disposable income and they've got more down the track from just being a little bit more proactive.
That's right.
I think that the next thing to kind of talk about around that is the difference that fund choice makes. Because yes, you can be compounding interest is great, but if you're in a fund that's only getting a 2% return till you retire versus a fund that's going to get you maybe 8% or 6%, even 4%, twice as much, like what the difference is. And I think a lot of people don't really think about that. And what are your thoughts on
That's absolutely
fund
right.
choice?
Absolutely. There are two things here. One is understanding yourself in terms of your risk profile. As anybody who wants to put money away into an investment program, the first thing they need to realize is every investment that you put, whether you're buying a home or you're buying a rental property or you're putting money on the stock market, there's a bit of risk associated with it. For that matter, putting money into a bank and leaving it there as a deposit has got some risk too. It's just something that nobody really factors into the equation. But as we all know, higher risks tend to generate higher returns, better returns, but also puts you in line for the occasional negative effect on your returns as well.
Yeah.
It's about therefore understanding your risk appetite.
Yeah. And how willing are you to log into your KiwiSaver and see, hey, I've just taken a big hit, without freaking out and thinking I need to take it out and change it, which is such it's a natural feeling for people to have. Like, if I change it, it's better. But I think, it's what we call crystallizing your losses, right? And you kind of now stuck in that situation and you can never really get that back. And it's better to stay there for the long term, which is why this whole risk profile is such a important
part of knowing yourself, as they say. And to just on this as an aside to your point, I still remember the post-COVID lockdowns. At that period, if you remember, the market did take a bit of a beating, and a lot of KiwiSaver balances really dropped off and in value. And I'm aware of a few close friends, and if I may put it that way, who actually crystallized their losses because they thought, hey, this is not the bottom, we're going to see worse. So they jumped ship and jumped into more safer options. They saw it then, which, to your point, just crystallizes their losses forever.
Yeah.
And it's money they can never get back again unless, of course, you wait for a really long time.
Yeah. And I think like a lot of, I guess, more, people with a high risk appetite are willing to almost put more money in when the market goes down, because, when you look at what you should be buying, I think like Warren Buffett always says that it's when the market goes down, everything's on sale. So you just buy, which is like totally opposite to what most people think when they think about KiwiSaver and the value going down.
Yes.
They should actually almost be putting more money in, but that's a discussion that they should be having with someone before they do that.
And it sounds counterintuitive, although it's very intuitive, really, if you think of it. Yes. It sounds counterintuitive in some senses, isn't it? And so that's the point. I mean, so long as you know and understand your risk appetite and your risk profile, and then your ability to take risk, I mean, that's also slightly different. I could be the most daring investor, but if I don't have enough of a buffer to be able to take those risks, then should I be, is also important to know. So once you know that, and then you know your time frame in terms of what are you working towards, that's also very important. I mean, if you've got a time frame of 2 years to buying your first home, then it's the decision.
Even if you're happy to take on all the risk in the world, should you be taking on all the risk in the world? Yeah,
exactly. The desire to take risks should match up with the reality of the situation as well. So it's a very different type of choice that you need to be making if you're looking at a shorter time frame, as opposed to a slightly longer time frame, as opposed to a really long time frame. So all of these are different. Therefore, to your point, choosing the right fund is not just about your appetite for risk or your profile of risk, but also what you're working towards in terms of your financial goals. So is your goal, you've got something big happening that you need to be considering, especially if you're looking to buy a home, or if some of your personal circumstances are going to change, you need to consider all of that when you look at the fund. So that's one of the things I think, we've talked about as well before on the side, was really choosing the right fund is critical. And choosing the right fund for yourself is very different from choosing the right fund that is best for somebody else.
Yes,
Which
it's
is
so
really,
personal.
which is, advisors like you and I can add value, because, our role is I think in many ways, if you look at it, we're probably better off to be called sounding boards rather than advisors, if you put it, because, the value we add is not so much that I tell you what's the right answer for you, as much as we bounce ideas of each other, and we get to a point where you're comfortable with what you're choosing for yourself, because you've made a more informed decision.
Yeah, I mean, I think also like the role of an advisor is to ask a lot of questions.
That's right.
So you're asking people all these kinds of questions, like how long before you want to, use the money in your KiwiSaver, what's your risk profile, and going through a process to make sure that you get that, making sure that the funds align, and like it's lots of questions around which providers you like, and you're not necessarily going and saying, well, I think this one's the best, and that's it. Like there's so many questions, and sometimes it's questions that people have never even thought of.
Exactly.
And they've never really had someone ask them that question. So they've never really gone through that process. And
that's right.
And I think that's really where our job is very important.
And also to the point we were talking about, KiwiSaver, for whether you're saving up for a home or you're saving up for retirement, is just one part of your overall financial puzzle of what you're putting together, right? It's one piece in your jigsaw puzzle of life.
Yeah.
But it needs to fit in appropriately to everything else. So, your financial needs and financial goals could be very different to mine, could be very different to somebody else that we talk to. And so making sure we've got the right choice working for ourselves is very important. Rather than listening to what somebody else has used and said, hey, I've done really well because I've got myself on XY plan or XY fund with this provider.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of, I guess when I read stuff on Reddit and online, there's so much of the active versus passive crowd and like how that's different and the fees involved. Do you have any thoughts on that? I think I've got a few, but it's a very prickly issue.
It's one of those really prickly issues, isn't it? I mean, do what is better? Is active better? Is passive? But I think both of them clearly have got their.
Do you want to have a go at explaining what active and passive is for those
Sure,
people
of
that
course.
might not know?
I'm absolutely fine. So, at the end of the day, when we say KiwiSaver, it's a managed fund. It's basically you're pulling in your money as part of a program that your provider runs, where they invested, not actively, where they invested in certain types of assets, whether that asset be, as we put, low risk, income-based assets like bonds or money in the bank kind of thing, to the other extreme, which could be things like property or even on the stock markets or into more exotic kind of investments. It really is. So that's the part of the role that the fund manager plays. They basically are taking your money and my money and pooling it with a bunch of other investors and trying to then buy a set of assets that they manage on our behalf. And hopefully the intention is that those assets are valuable enough to grow over time, so that what you put in today is going to generate more revenue and going to ensure that by the time you reach a point of a decision, whether that be your home or whether that be a retirement situation, it's built up to a value that you've expected it to come up to. So there are two ways of doing this. One is you give your money to somebody who essentially actively invests and decides, hey, this particular asset is something that's of value, which we should some money behind.
Yeah, or this company and this share
is
going to do well.
Yes.
We believe in the future, and we're going to back that horse almost in a way.
That's right. And as you and I, if we've ever tried to day trade in the stock market, it's not everybody's game. You've got to be. It's got to be a little bit more invested in terms of your effort, which is what an active manager does.
And you have to, like, I think the thing is, like, active managers, their whole job is to understand the market. That's all they do every day.
Yes, that's exactly their game. That I wouldn't be able to hold down a day job and do an active trade on the side, because that's not what the game's all about. It's about being sure you understand what every company that you're sort of buying a piece of is what it's doing in terms of its position in the market, its strategy, the environment, the political environment. All of that put together makes an impact, or has an impact on where that's going, right?
Yeah, for sure. And then passive?
And passive on the other side is rather than trying to actively choose where you want to invest your money, it's essentially trying to track a market index of some form, whether that index be the New Zealand Stock Exchange index of the top 20 companies, or whether it's the ASX 100, the Australian Stock Exchange index, or whether it's the Standard & Poor's S&P 500. So essentially, it's a basket of companies that make up an index, where you can buy a unit of that basket rather than buying an individual company, or rather putting your money behind an individual company. The idea being it minimizes the risk that you take on an individual company, but then buys you, in a sense, buying you where the market's headed, which broadly cuts out a lot of the risk that you would tend to see in individual investments.
And because when you get to the passive investment and there's not as much requirement for someone to know all of this stuff, that's where the fees differ. Is that they don't have to
actively manage it anymore.
Actively manage and spend the money on employing a whole raft of people to do all the analysis and make sure that they're making good choices. So there's definitely it's a very different philosophy, and I think that those two camps are quite well set in their ways.
I think it's one of those conundrums, one of those questions that will never get resolved. I know you'll get experts on both sides suggest that particular their philosophy is the best philosophy. I think the answer lies somewhere in between, really. There are many good things to being part of a passive fund, in that, especially with the markets rising, everybody tends to be part of that. So you benefit without having to invest too much by way of fees. Whereas from an active manager's point of view, their game is a little bit more than just being part of a rising tide. They also want to make sure that when the market's on the down, that your investments, which they've put time and money and effort to identify, is actually going to work better. When I say better, it could be less worse than where the market's headed, or slightly better in that they've picked some real winners that stand out even when
a declining market.
So both have got their benefits.
Both of the benefits, and I think sometimes people get a little bit stuck on the fees side of things, and how it's this fund is more expensive than the next. But I think it really comes down to like long-term returns and how how that fund or that provider has done over time, as opposed to just blanket. It's I'm going to go with this KiwiSaver provider because they passive instead of active.
That's right, exactly. So I think you're absolutely right. I mean, at the end of the day, net returns are really important.
Yep.
And net returns really, therefore, means it's your returns less your fees. So whether I'm paying, a 0.5% fee or I'm paying a 1% fee, so long as my returns are better, that's really important. But the real measure is performance over time.
Yeah.
And performance over time is really the only way you can be sure that you're backing the right horse.
Yes.
So, as we rightly say, past performance is not an indicator of future performance. But if you had to choose between a couple, then the important thing is, does somebody have the track record that justifies your faith in them? And equally important, and I think that's where an advisor can help as well, is when the markets have not done as well as they should be, which funds have actually then managed to keep the head above water, as compared to the others. That's also important. I mean, you could be an active manager, but maybe you didn't necessarily do as well, or performed exactly the same as a passive fund.
Yeah.
In which case, then clearly, is there value that you're adding? Is a good question to ask, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's definitely something to look at and have a chat to someone about if you're not sure.
For sure. And get somebody whose only job in the market, really, like yours and mine, is to be tracking how providers are performing,
Yeah.
to be seeing how they've invested in the markets, and to what what their fees are. So looking at it probably as a whole, rather than just being fixated on one thing, is
Yeah.
really important.
Yeah. And I think for those people that are DIY inclined, it's always like going to look at the Morningstar report and see
Yes.
what's going on
Yes.
there, because people, that's a great way to see the rankings. But rankings only tell you a certain part of the story, right?
That's
And that's
right.
you need to understand the rest of it too.
That's right.
So that's always important. A little
Yep.
bit to remember when you're looking at those reports.
Yeah. Headlines, to your point, can be very misleading sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah.
Headlines can be very misleading.
Yeah. It's like a fund might be the number one for 3 months, but they've only been in operation for 6 months. So
That's right. Exactly.
they might be, so it's
Exactly.
definitely something to look at.
So that's hopefully the value you and I can add, in terms of saying, hey, we bring a little bit more to the conversation, and to the assessment of your needs as a client, and being able to point you in the direction of the types of investments and the types of funds that you should be part of, to build towards a certain goal that you're working to.
I think we have kind of reached our time limit for now, so I think we have to cut it there, but we're going to have to bring it back and continue the conversation, because there's so much to discuss when it comes to KiwiSaver, obviously.
I think I agree totally. Very happy to be part again. So it's a lovely conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on today, and I really appreciate your input and your insights into KiwiSaver.
Thanks, Jacques. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed today's episode and gained some useful insights. If you found it helpful, please share it with someone who might benefit from it too. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can find details to connect with today's guests in the show notes. And remember, the information shared here is for educational purposes only. For personalized support, reach out to a qualified financial advisor or appropriate professional. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time on Building Sense for Life.